Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So this is what we had for an official description of Rogue Squadron when we got the announcement back in December of 2020. The next Star Wars feature film will be Rogue Squadron, directed by Patty Jenkins. The story will introduce a new generation of starfighter pilots as they earn their wings and risk their lives in a boundary-pushing, high-speed thrill ride and move the saga into the future era of the galaxy. And shortly thereafter, in an interview Patty Jenkins did, she said, "We're doing something original with great influence from the games and the books. There's a lot of things being acknowledged and understood about the greatness of all those things, but yes, it's an original story and I'm so psyched to do it." And from that point on, I guess you could refer to the production as troubled, as it were. So about a year later, in November of 2021, there were reports that the movie would be delayed because of the other projects that Patty Jenkins was working on. And then we got to Celebration Anaheim in May of 2022, and there was no word whatsoever about Rogue Squadron shared there. So Kathleen Kennedy did an interview at the time and said that Rogue Squadron was kind of moving off to the side and that Patty Jenkins was still working on the script. Oh, and I forgot to mention the fact that Patty Jenkins had said that there was another writer who was working on Rogue Squadron with her, and that writer was revealed to be a person named Matthew Robinson back in May of 2021, and they were close to having a script ready at the time, but then the November 21 delay potentially with regard to Patty Jenkins' other projects, and then the May 22nd thing from Kathleen Kennedy. And then finally, since they were at the point of no return basically in September of 2022, they took Rogue Squadron off the Disney movie release schedule. It had been scheduled, of course, for December of 2023, but yeah, if they hadn't started filming by September of 22, they definitely weren't going to make that release date. And for the next 6 or 7 months, all the reports were that Rogue Squadron was basically dead, that it was no longer in active development. Anonymous sources and insider scoops were saying that, yeah, it's done, it's toast, forget it. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise to go to Celebration Europe in April of this year and not hear a single thing about Rogue Squadron, and in fact hear about 3 entirely different movies. But Kathleen Kennedy, of course, was asked about what Rogue Squadron's status was, and she told IGN in an interview that it's definitely still something that's happening. And then, of course, as we've talked about, she said the same to Empire magazine for their summer 2023 issue. But the intriguing thing about what she said to IGN was that it could possibly continue on as a movie or even as a series. And if that's the case, then they'd basically be going the Obi-Wan Kenobi route. As you'll recall, Obi-Wan Kenobi was initially being developed as a movie that was going to be directed by Stephen Daldry, and things didn't quite work out for whatever reasons that happened behind the scenes, and they decided to expand it out and develop it as a limited series for Disney Plus instead. So the possibility that they've developed Rogue Squadron far enough where they could take some of the bones of that and actually flesh it out and make it even bigger sounds particularly fascinating. And I gotta say too, if you look at that in light of, say, Rangers of the New Republic, as we were talking about earlier this week, the idea of reinventing Rogue Squadron as a different way of looking at Rangers of the New Republic would be a pretty fascinating way of going about things. The only difference, of course, is that the way the original Rogue Squadron concept was pitched was that it was taking place after the events of the Rise of Skywalker for all intents and purposes, and doing something like Rangers would put it definitely not that far out by any means. And in fact, if they wanted to do something where they were building out the post-Rise of Skywalker Star Wars universe of storytelling, then Rogue Squadron could be a TV series that was supported on Disney Plus, along with the New Jedi Order movie that the wonderful Daisy Ridley is coming back for. So it sounds like they've got multiple options, but the reports of Rogue Squadron's demise are absolutely utterly exaggerated, and it seems like, yeah, it's weird. People seem to have been wanting this movie to die, and it's just, definitely not dying, basically. They just haven't got it quite right yet. So that's what I've got for you about Rogue Squadron and its tumultuous journey so far, and that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.